When Mira and Elara Lennox inherited their grandmother's forgotten farmhouse in the windswept town of Alderidge, they expected dust, creaky floors, and maybe a few old family photos. What they didn't expect was the trapdoor buried beneath decades of debris in the cellar, and what lay underneath it. What they found didn't just change their lives, it rewrote a piece of history and stunned an entire nation. The letter arrived on a cold March morning, sealed in cracked red wax and addressed in shaky handwriting. Mira Lennox, the older of the two sisters, nearly threw it out, assuming it was another one of those fake inheritance scams that had been circulating the internet. But something about the stamp caught her eye. Alderidge, Cornwall, a name she hadn't heard since she was a teenager. By the time Mira tore the letter open and called her younger sister Elara, neither of them had any idea that this single envelope would lead them into one of the strangest, most emotionally charged experiences of their lives. The letter was from a solicitor named Bernard Ashcroft, informing them of the death of their estranged grandmother, Beatrice Lennox, a woman they barely remembered and had spoken of even less. According to Ashcroft, Beatrice had left her farmhouse, known locally as Thornmere Grange, to the sisters in her will. "Do you remember her?" Elara asked over the phone, voice echoing slightly with the sound of boiling tea in the background. "Vaguely. I think she wore a hat all the time. Big garden, maybe?" "Dad never really talked about her after the move," Mira said, pacing her flat in Bristol. Truth be told, their father had gone silent about Beatrice decades ago. The family history on that side was shadowed in strange silences and unfinished stories. No one had ever really explained why the family left Cornwall or why visits back were so rare. Now, with both parents gone and the rest of the family dispersed, the only thing left was a shabby old house on the edge of the moors, and whatever secrets it had buried within its walls. 2 weeks later, the sisters stood at the rusted iron gate of Thornmere Grange. The house was exactly what you'd expect from a century-old English farmhouse: crooked shingles, ivy strangling the exterior, and windows so dusty they looked frosted. It leaned slightly to the left, like it was tired of standing tall after all these years. They walked through tall grass, suitcases dragging behind them, boots crunching over gravel and broken pottery. The front door creaked open before they even touched it, not from some ghostly force, but because the hinges had rusted to the point of surrender. The smell hit them instantly, a mix of old wood, forgotten books, and something damp. Elara wrinkled her nose. "This place smells like a haunted library." Mira chuckled nervously. "Let's hope it doesn't read like one." Despite the condition of the house, the sisters weren't exactly disappointed. The idea of restoring Thornmere Grange into something livable or sellable gave them a shared purpose, something they hadn't had in years. Mira, a graphic designer burned out from London life, and Elara, a part-time barista with a passion for art and antiques, had both been feeling stuck. Maybe this was their chance to start fresh. The first 2 days were spent cleaning, peeling wallpaper, opening stuck drawers, and tossing out mummified remains of what used to be canned goods. There was no electricity, barely any plumbing, and a family of mice that clearly didn't want to leave. But it was on the third day, while sorting through the cellar, that Mira's foot hit something unusual. They were clearing away a pile of broken crates and damp newspapers when she slipped and knocked her shin on what looked like an old metal ring embedded in the floor. "Hey, Elara, help me move this." Together, they cleared the remaining debris, revealing a square outline carved into the stone. A trapdoor. Heavy. Old. Bolted shut with a chain so rusted it snapped apart in Mira's hands. Elara hesitated. "Should we?" "I don't know, call someone first." "Call who?" "Ghostbusters." Mira grabbed a flashlight and pulled the door open with a groan. A gust of cold air blew upward, stale and metallic. A wooden ladder disappeared into darkness. What they didn't realize then was that this cellar wasn't listed on any blueprints, mentioned in any family records, or known by the solicitor who had overseen the property transfer. It simply shouldn't have existed. Yet here it was. Waiting. And what was at the bottom of that hidden stairwell, what lay beneath Thornmere Grange, would take the sisters far beyond family inheritance drama. It would plunge them into a decades-old mystery involving wartime secrets, lost identities, and one artifact that would make international headlines. But at that moment, all they had was a flashlight, each other, and a question neither of them dared to ask out loud. Why did our grandmother keep this part of the house a secret, and what exactly did she hide down there? The metal ring embedded in the stone had snapped off with barely a tug, but the trapdoor itself groaned in protest as Mira pulled it open. A swirl of cold, stale air hissed upward from the darkness, smelling like rust, mold, and earth. They stood in silence, staring down the opening. Mira shone her flashlight into the void. It's a ladder. Wooden. Pretty old, but not rotted. Elara hugged her arms. I don't like this. You don't like anything that involves spiders, Mira teased, masking her own unease. Still, the question hovered over them like smoke. Why had no one ever mentioned this part of the house? Not their father. Not the solicitor. Not a single blueprint or inspection report hinted at a subcellar, yet here it was. Elara crouched by the edge. Do you think she used it during the war? A shelter, maybe? Mira didn't answer immediately. She kept the beam steady, trying to gauge the depth. I'm going down. What? No way. That ladder could collapse. We've survived worse, she said with a faint smile. Besides, aren't you the one always saying the best antiques are found in the weirdest places? Reluctantly, Elara nodded. Fine. But I'm coming too. And if I see a rat the size of a cat, I'm leaving you down there. The first few steps creaked, but held. The ladder descended a good 10 feet before Mira's boots touched solid ground, not dirt, as expected, but stone. Cold, damp, and unnaturally smooth. She swung her flashlight around and froze. Holy! What? What is it? Elara called down. Just, come see this. When Elara finally landed beside her, they stood together in a room that felt too intentional to be accidental. The walls were stone-bricked, with reinforced beams across the ceiling, and long shelves that lined both sides. There was dust, of course, and cobwebs, and the smell of decay. But it didn't feel like a forgotten space. It felt prepared. The flashlight passed over an old writing desk in the corner, still intact. Beside it stood a tall, narrow cabinet with a glass front, empty, save for a faded photograph that had fallen to the bottom shelf. Elara reached in and pulled it out. Mira, look. The photo showed a young woman in a nurse's uniform standing beside a man in a military jacket. The woman looked familiar, like an older version of someone they'd seen once, long ago, in a frame at their father's desk. Is that Gran? Mira took the photo. It has to be. But who's the man? Before Elara could answer, the flashlight beam swept over something far more curious, a stack of metal crates tucked in the back corner, each marked with faded black stenciling. Property of British Army, 1944. Oh my God, Elara whispered. This really was a war shelter. No, this was something else, Mira said, crouching beside the nearest crate. She brushed away dust and unlatched it. The hinges screamed in protest, but it opened. Inside were documents, maps, letters, ID tags, photographs. Some were marked confidential. Others bore official seals from the Ministry of Defense. Elara pulled one out carefully. Why would Grandma have these? These are military files. They moved methodically through the materials, trying not to damage anything. Several of the documents were written in German. Others mentioned code names and numbered operations. Mira's heart began to race. I think this is intelligence work, she muttered. A wave of disbelief passed between them. Was their grandmother involved in espionage? No one had ever mentioned she was anything more than a nurse during the war. Suddenly, Mira spotted something glinting between two wooden beams in the wall. She reached in and pulled out a small metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, sealed with a combination lock. This looks serious. It was heavier than expected. Elara took it and held it to her ear. Something's inside. Something metal. They tried the lock, but no luck. No birthday combinations worked, no familiar numbers. Let's take it upstairs. We can't do this down here. As they climbed back up into the cellar, the unease had settled deeper. They weren't just exploring an old farmhouse anymore, they were standing on the edge of a story they didn't fully understand, one their grandmother had gone to great lengths to bury. Back in the dim light of the kitchen, Mira placed the box on the table like a museum artifact. Elara paced nearby, chewing her lip. This is insane. Do you think Dad knew? No, Mira said softly. If he did, he would have told us something before he died. He never even mentioned the war, remember? What do we do now? Do we tell someone? The solicitor? Mira shook her head. Not yet. We don't know what we're dealing with. These files could be fake. Or they could be sensitive. Elara raised an eyebrow. You think she was a spy? I don't know. But she was hiding something. And it's probably bigger than just family secrets. That night, the farmhouse groaned with wind and creaks. The sisters barely slept, the locked box sitting like a loaded gun on the dining table. At 2:13 a.m., Mira found herself wide awake. She got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The box was still there, untouched, but now bathed in pale moonlight from the cracked window above. She stared at it, then at the photo from the cellar still lying beside it. Her grandmother's eyes seemed to look right back at her. You wanted us to find this, didn't you? She whispered. Because no one hides something that deep without knowing someone might eventually come looking. And now, Mira and Elara had no choice but to uncover the truth. What had their grandmother done during the war? What had she taken, or protected? And why, after all these years, did it still matter? They were about to find out. Morning sunlight filtered through the broken panes of Thornmere Grange's kitchen window, casting fractured patterns over the worn wooden table where the locked metal box still sat, silent, heavy, unmoved. Mira stared at it while sipping her now-cold tea, her mind racing with theories. Elara stumbled in, hair tangled, wrapped in a blanket. Did you sleep at all? Not really. Kept going over everything. I've been trying number combinations all night. Nothing worked. Elara sat across from her and pulled the faded photo of Beatrice and the unknown man closer. He looks so familiar. Doesn't he look like? Mira nodded before she could finish. Dad. Both sisters fell into silence. The resemblance was undeniable. The jawline, the eyes, the man in the photograph could have been their father's twin. But the uniform he wore, it wasn't British. Not fully. It's not just the photo, Mira added. There's more. Look what I found in the desk from the cellar. She reached into a tote bag beside her and pulled out a bundle of papers tied together with faded green ribbon. They weren't official documents, they were letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten in both English and German. The ink was faded, the pages worn, but the signature on nearly every page was unmistakable. L. Kessler. Elara gently unfolded one of the letters and read aloud. My dearest B. Tonight the bombs fell closer. But your last letter, your words, gave me strength I didn't think I had left. If the war takes me, know this, I have loved you more deeply than I was ever permitted to say. Yours always. LK. Elara looked up, stunned. These aren't just friendly letters. They're love letters. Mira nodded slowly. And L. Kessler. I think he's the man in the photo. But that name, Elara frowned. It's not British. No. It's German. Another wave of silence hit the kitchen like a cold wind. A British nurse, their grandmother, secretly in a relationship with a German man during World War II? If that was true, it would have been seen as treasonous back then. Even dangerous. But how? Why? Elara whispered. Mira reached for another letter. Some of these are dated 1943. She must have met him during the war. Maybe he was a prisoner. Or a defector. They kept reading. Letter after letter told the same story, of two people caught in a forbidden love, trying to survive the war in their own quiet rebellion. Beatrice had risked everything, her position, her reputation, maybe even her safety, to keep this relationship hidden. And it wasn't just letters. Tucked inside one envelope was a hand-drawn map, marked with symbols and what appeared to be coordinates, forested areas, coastal spots, something resembling an old airfield. "This looks military," Mira muttered. Elara leaned over. What if Kessler wasn't just a soldier? What if he was intelligence? That possibility struck a chord. They'd already found military crates, coded documents, and Ministry of Defense seals in the hidden room. The implications were growing heavier by the hour. Later that day, Mira drove into town to visit the Alderidge local archives, hoping to find any trace of Kessler or a connection to their grandmother. Elara stayed behind to scan more of the Cellar documents and work on the metal box, which still refused to open. The archive was quiet, an old converted chapel with crooked bookcases and dust floating in sunbeams like lazy snow. A volunteer named Iris, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a sharper memory, greeted her warmly. "You said your family owned Thornmere Grange?" Iris asked, peering over her glasses. "Yes. Beatrice Lennox was my grandmother." Iris's expression shifted, ever so slightly. "I remember her. Bit of a mystery, that one. Used to walk into town during the war with bandages on her arms, said it was from the hospital work, but some folks whispered otherwise." Mira leaned in. "Do you remember if she had a German friend? Or anything about someone named Kessler?" Iris hesitated. "Now that you mention it, there was talk. My father used to say some of the German prisoners worked on farms nearby. One went missing, and people assumed he'd escaped back across the channel somehow. Caused a bit of panic. Never confirmed. Do you remember his name?" "I don't," Iris said slowly. "But there were rumors he wasn't a prisoner at all. That he was a double agent, working with the British to feed false intel to the Nazis. Dangerous business." Mira's mind spun. Was that Kessler? Back at the farmhouse, Elara had managed to pry open a few more crates from the cellar and uncovered a weathered notebook written entirely in German. But it wasn't just a journal, it was a field log, filled with dates, coded transmissions, and intercepted communications. On the last page, a name appeared, barely legible, written in capital letters and underlined. Operation Merlin, target location, Rookmire Coastal Radio Station. Elara took a photo and sent it to Mira immediately. Within minutes, Mira called. "That radio station, it was a military decoy, wasn't it? I read about it in the archives. It was used to trick German bombers with fake signals." Elara blinked. "So, you're saying Kessler may have helped us win the war?" Mira's voice was steady but shaken. "I think he was a spy. A double agent. And Gran helped him." Elara stared down at the documents, her heart pounding. Their grandmother hadn't just kept a forbidden love secret. She had hidden a wartime conspiracy, protected a man the world believed to be an enemy, and possibly played a critical role in one of Britain's greatest counterintelligence operations, all from her quiet farmhouse in Alderidge. And now, the world would finally know. But only if the sisters were willing to tell the story. And if they could figure out what was inside that locked metal box. The evening shadows stretched long across the uneven floorboards of Thornmere Grange as Mira and Elara sat huddled around the kitchen table, papers and photographs scattered between them like pieces of a complicated puzzle. The air was thick with anticipation and a growing sense of urgency. They had spent the better part of the afternoon poring over the coded military field log and the letters, their minds racing to connect the dots between their grandmother, the mysterious Kessler, and the covert Operation Merlin. But there was one element they still hadn't cracked, the locked metal box, heavier and more mysterious than anything else they had found. Whatever it contained was clearly important, but without the combination, it remained an impenetrable fortress. Searching for clues. The sisters exchanged a tired glance. They'd tried every conceivable number, birthdays, anniversaries, even random guesses based on dates they'd seen in the letters. Nothing worked. "We're missing something," Elara muttered, biting her lip. "There has to be a clue somewhere. Somewhere in all these papers." Mira nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the photographs on the table. "Maybe it's in the letters themselves. Maybe Gran left us a hint. Some kind of code." Elara pulled one of the envelopes closer and tapped it thoughtfully. "We should look for patterns. Numbers that repeat or anything that looks out of place." As they sifted through the pages again, Mira's fingers stopped on a faint smudge of ink on one of the envelopes. A cluster of 3 numbers, 312, was circled faintly in pencil. "Could this be it?" she asked. Elara's eyes lit up. "Maybe. But 3 digits isn't enough. Usually, locks like this have 4 or 5 numbers." "Look at the letter this envelope came from," Mira said, holding it up. "It's dated March 12, 1944. That's 3/12. Maybe the 312 is part of a longer combination." They began searching for other numbers in the letters, documents, and photographs. Slowly, a pattern emerged, a series of dates, coordinates, and codes scattered throughout the papers that, when pieced together, hinted at a longer numeric code. A hidden message in the margins. Elara noticed something else as she examined one of the letters more closely. "Mira, look at this." In the margins, tiny dots and dashes formed a sequence, almost like a pattern, Morse code. "I think Gran was sending us a message," Elara whispered. They spent the next hour painstakingly decoding the faint marks, their hearts pounding as the sequence slowly emerged into a chilling message. "Trust no one, Operation Merlin is not over." The sisters exchanged a nervous glance. What could it mean? The war had been over for decades. Why would their grandmother warn them that this operation wasn't finished? The community reacts. News of their discovery was impossible to keep secret in Alderidge. By the next morning, whispers had spread through the village like wildfire. At the local cafe, Mira overheard an elderly man talking in hushed tones. "That Lennox girl, she's stirring up old ghosts. Some of those war secrets are better left buried." Elara, sitting beside her, frowned. "Why would anyone want us to stop?" Mira sighed. "Because secrets like these have power. And power attracts people who want to keep them hidden." They weren't just dealing with family history anymore, they were now participants in a story bigger than themselves, caught in a web of hidden loyalties, old enemies, and shadows that reached far beyond their little farmhouse. Unlocking the box. Late that evening, fueled by determination and adrenaline, the sisters returned to the locked box. With trembling hands, Mira entered the first 3 digits, 312. The lock clicked softly, but didn't open. "Try adding 44 foot from 1944, Elara suggested, for the year the letters are from." Mira typed 31244. A pause. A loud click. The lock sprang open. Inside the box lay a collection of items that took their breath away. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, with a brass clasp. A small, velvet pouch containing a rusted key attached to a delicate chain. Several faded maps and blueprints, annotated with symbols and notes in both English and German. And a small metal cylinder, no bigger than a lipstick tube, engraved with strange symbols. Mira picked up the journal and flipped through it carefully. "This must be Beatrice's diary," she said softly. "Or at least her personal account." The diary, a portal to the past. That night, the sisters took turns reading aloud from the diary by candlelight. Beatrice's words painted a picture of a woman caught between 2 worlds, a British nurse who had fallen in love with a man branded the enemy, but who was, in fact, a secret agent fighting to save lives on both sides. Her diary described secret meetings in the dead of night, coded transmissions sent via hidden radios, and a desperate mission to protect an artifact, the metal cylinder, rumored to hold the key to ending a covert war within the war. But as the entries progressed, a darker truth emerged: the operation was compromised by traitors within their own ranks, and Beatrice had been forced to hide everything in the cellar of Thornmere Grange to keep it safe. The last entry was written in haste, with scrawled handwriting and crossed-out words. "They are coming. If this is found, the truth must live on. I trust only my granddaughters to carry this forward. For the future of our country, and for the memory of those who sacrificed everything." A decision to make. The sisters sat back, the weight of their grandmother's words settling like dust in the quiet room. "This isn't just a family secret," Elara said. "It's a responsibility." Mira nodded. "And we need to decide what to do with it. Do we tell the world? Or keep it hidden, like Gran did?" But before they could answer, a sudden knock at the door startled them both. Mira froze. "Who could that be at this hour?" Elara whispered. They exchanged worried glances as the knocking came again, louder this time. The knock at the door echoed through the silent farmhouse, sharp and urgent, slicing through the heavy quiet like a blade. Mira and Elara froze, their eyes wide and searching the shadows beyond the flickering candlelight. Neither dared speak for a moment. Who could that be?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. Mira swallowed hard. "I don't know. Nobody comes to Thornmere Grange at night." Elara's grip tightened around the diary. "What if it's someone who knows about the cellar? Someone who wants the box?" Mira's heart pounded. The last thing they wanted was for their grandmother's secrets to fall into the wrong hands. The knocking came again, 3 quick, insistent raps. A stranger at the door. Mira crept toward the front door, every nerve alert. She peered through the peephole but saw only a vague silhouette, cloaked in the night's darkness. "Who's there?" she called, trying to steady her voice. There was no answer. Taking a deep breath, Mira unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. Standing there was an elderly man, tall and thin, dressed in a worn trench coat, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were sharp and piercing, and his gaze locked onto hers. "My name is Thomas Granger," the man said softly, voice gravelly but calm. "I'm here about Beatrice Lennox. The past comes calling." Mira's breath caught in her throat. "How do you know my grandmother?" Thomas's eyes flickered with a mixture of sadness and relief. "I was one of her closest friends during the war. We worked together on Operation Merlin." Elara, still clutching the diary, stepped forward cautiously. "You knew about the operation? The letters, the secrets in the cellar?" Thomas nodded. "I helped protect those secrets for decades, but now, time is running out." He glanced past them, as if expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "What do you mean, time is running out?" Mira asked. "The people who betrayed us back then are still around. They want to keep the truth buried. And they've started watching Thornmere Grange." A dangerous revelation. Thomas explained that after the war, some members of British intelligence had turned against their own, using Operation Merlin as a cover for darker agendas. Beatrice and her closest allies had hidden crucial evidence that could have exposed a network of corruption within the government. "Your grandmother was one of the few who resisted," Thomas said. "She paid a high price for it." Elara's hands trembled. "But why reveal all this now? Why come here?" "Because I believe you're the only ones who can finish what she started," Thomas replied. "The key to uncovering the full truth lies in that metal cylinder you found. But it's not just a keepsake, it's a device containing encrypted information. Information that, if revealed, could change everything we thought we knew about the war." Mira and Elara exchanged a stunned look. Their grandmother's past wasn't just about secret love letters and hidden rooms, it was a battle against shadows that stretched across decades. The weight of responsibility. Thomas moved inside the kitchen, carefully sitting down at the table piled with letters and maps. "You have to understand," he said, voice low, "the forces aligned against Beatrice then are still powerful. They don't want this story told. And they will stop at nothing." Mira felt a chill creep up her spine. "What do you want us to do?" Thomas reached into his coat pocket and produced an old, battered safe deposit box key. "This belongs to you now. It opens a box hidden in the town's archives, one that contains the final piece of the puzzle. But you'll need more than courage. You'll need allies. Elara stood abruptly. Who can we trust? Thomas hesitated, then said, There's one person. An old contact of Beatrice's. A historian named Dr. Evelyn Hart. She's spent her life researching secret wartime operations. She believes in the truth, and she's willing to help. Preparing for the next step. The sisters sat back, absorbing everything. The farmhouse, once a quiet place of family history, was now the center of a dangerous game. We have to be careful, Mira said firmly. But we can't back down now. $4,000. Elara nodded. We owe it to her. Thomas smiled faintly. Good. Because the next few days will be critical. There are eyes on this house. People who don't want you digging deeper. He looked at the metal cylinder on the table. That device is the key. It's time you learn how to unlock it. Unveiling the device. Thomas carefully retrieved the cylinder and examined it under the light. Its surface was covered in strange symbols, intricate, almost otherworldly. It's an early form of cryptography, he explained. Made to be nearly impossible to decode without the proper keys. But your grandmother left behind a clue to help you. He pointed to a tiny engraving on the cylinder's base, a series of numbers and letters. Those correspond to coordinates and dates in the documents you found. They're part of a cipher, a code that, once cracked, will reveal what's inside. Mira traced the engraving with her finger, heart pounding. We'll need to work fast, Thomas warned. Because those who want to keep this secret hidden are closer than you think. The night falls heavy. That night, as the wind rattled the farmhouse windows, Mira and Elara lay awake, minds racing with questions and possibilities. Their grandmother's past was not just a tale of forbidden love and war, it was a story of courage, betrayal, and sacrifice that had been hidden for decades. Now it was their turn to uncover the truth. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous their quest became. Because secrets this old, this powerful, never stay buried forever. With Dr. Evelyn Hart's expertise, Mira and Elara finally decrypted the metal cylinder's secrets, a trove of evidence exposing long-hidden betrayals and heroic acts from Operation Merlin. Their grandmother's courage illuminated truths that reshaped history and honored forgotten sacrifices. As the story made headlines, the sisters felt the weight of legacy but also the pride of unveiling justice. Thornmere Grange was no longer just a shabby farm, it was a beacon of resilience. In embracing the past, they forged a future where truth could never be buried again.